My dad, in his 50s, started dating a woman named Fran, also in her 50s, during my college years. I was a 30-year-old woman at the time, and from the onset, our relationship was a complicated one. Fran was simply too much for me, and her presence in my life from the get-go was overwhelming. I remember the first time I met Fran vividly. It was supposed to be a relaxed introduction, but instead, it turned into an interrogation of my personal life. She bombarded me with deeply intrusive questions. She wanted to know about every aspect of my upbringing, especially how I coped with growing up without a mother around, considering it was mostly my dad and male figures in my extended family who influenced my childhood. Fran's barrage of questions left me caught off guard and a bit uncomfortable. I tried my best to stay polite, but it was clear to me that this was not a typical first meeting. I think, in her mind, Fran was trying to connect and show that she cared, but it did not sit well with me. My dad, on the other hand, was convinced that Fran was just excited to meet me, genuinely looking forward to being a supportive figure in my life. He even referred to her as a potential female mentor or a kind of motherly figure, given that he believed I might have been yearning for one after growing up without a mom. In those early days, I endeavored to let Fran know my boundaries gently but firmly. I explained to her on more than one occasion that I was not at ease sharing such personal information with someone I barely knew. Fran, however, had other ideas. She seemed to think she understood me better than I understood myself, which felt audacious coming from someone I had only just met. She reassured me, or at least attempted to, that I need not worry about missing out on a motherly presence because she was there to step into that role for me. To her, it seemed as though this was some fixed relationship that she could dictate, where I would automatically start seeing her as an essential, nurturing presence. Fran presented herself as someone who would never falter from these self-appointed duties of a mother, trying to bring me comfort about an absence I had grown accustomed to my whole life. I made it clear to her, once again, that she held no such duties or responsibilities in my life. At this point, I was very much an independent adult, fully capable of handling my life's challenges without needing someone to fill a maternal gap. Despite my attempts to set these boundaries, nothing I said seemed to reach her. Fran seemed determined to carve out a role in my life by any means. She continued to push this narrative she had crafted for herself, opting to do what she wanted regardless of my feelings. It was clear from the beginning that communicating with Fran was going to be challenging. Her insistence on these roles and her lack of respect for my comfort levels caused tension between us. I felt trapped between wanting to maintain peace with my dad's partner and asserting my independence as an adult woman. Despite the rocky start, I hoped that with time, Fran might respect my boundaries, allowing us to have a cordial, if not overly close, relationship. But in those early years, it became obvious that her enthusiasm to be a part of my life was going to require more patience and tolerance on my part than I anticipated. And then came the moment that encapsulated everything about Fran's approach, her staunch refusal to understand and respect the limits I tried to set. There was this particular incident that stands out vividly in my memory, a turning point of sorts, which tested my patience to its limit. Fran felt that it was her duty to have a discussion with me about sex education, a talk I did not seek or welcome. Imagine being in your late 20s, fully aware of your choices and confident in your understanding of your own life, only to have someone impose such a conversation on you. I was taken aback and honestly a little offended. Here was someone whom I viewed as no more than an acquaintance, attempting to dive into one of the most intimate aspects of my life without any invitation. It was more than intrusive. It felt like an invasion. The awkwardness of the situation was enough to dissuade me from visiting my dad for a solid 8 months. It wasn't just the fact that Fran had brought up the topic, it was her inability to accept my refusals. Fran came at me armed with pamphlets, diagrams, and well-rehearsed talking points, ready to embark on a monologue I had neither solicited nor desired. But Fran couldn't grasp that sometimes personal boundaries need to be respected without question. Despite my clear and repeated no, she pushed on, convinced that she knew what was best for me. It wasn't merely an attempt to enforce her perspective, but an outright refusal to acknowledge my autonomy. She didn't see me as an independent woman who had carved her own path and was perfectly content with the life choices I had made. My dad, in these instances, was caught in the middle. Though he tried to support me, there were moments when he failed to fully address the seriousness of Fran's behavior. He often played it off as Fran merely being overzealous, yet supportive in her own unique way. But to me, it was more than just enthusiasm. It was a persistent ignorance to the cues I was giving. Her ongoing actions felt dismissive of my personhood, as if not having grown up with a mother meant I was lacking in some elemental way and required her intervention. There was a burgeoning dread every time I anticipated an interaction with her. I felt like I was dealing with a version of a steamroller, one that flattened out all objections to fit her narrative of how things ought to be, regardless of how much discord it sowed in the process. Each time I tried to gently steer conversations away from my personal life and towards more innocuous topics, it was as if she heard what I was saying, but assumed I didn't truly mean it. Fran's approach added layers of strain to my relationship with my dad. There were times I questioned how much he understood the discomfort she was putting me through. I didn't want to force him to choose between his happiness and mine, nor did I want to disrupt his relationship with Fran. So instead, I retreated. But this retreat only seemed to fuel Fran's resolve. Rather than stepping back, she would direct her energies into planning grand gestures to make up for the distance she could sense, engagements I simply didn't want to partake in. It left me in a constant state of emotional tug-of-war, balancing an internal dialogue between maintaining civility and defending my personal space. Even as I opted to take a step back, seeking solace in my own life away from the increased drama her presence brought, I couldn't entirely escape the looming cloud of expectation that Fran cast over me. In the early years, what could have been a cordial exchange remained overshadowed by her continuous attempts to assert herself as a mother figure. Her unyielding nature made it clear to me that working through this relationship would require more than just time. It would need a clarity of communication that couldn't be shied away from. But for the sake of peace, my focus remained on maintaining a respectful distance, hoping that one day, Fran might finally listen and honor the boundaries I set. Our relationship has always leaned very one-sided. Fran embraced her role of wanting to be the mother figure, desiring closeness, and envisioning an idealized mother-daughter relationship. Yet, all her desires couldn't change how I felt, a mix of overwhelm and resentment that lingered beneath the surface. From her perspective, Fran seemed to genuinely care and wanted us to spend time together, perhaps picturing us enjoying mother-daughter brunches, shopping trips, and intimate heart-to-heart conversations filled with advice and bonding. Her well-meaning intentions were not lost on me, but they were consistently overshadowed by the way she disregarded my autonomy, refusing to see that I had long settled into my adult life without a maternal hand guiding me. On my side, every meeting with Fran demanded an almost Herculean effort of mental preparation, bracing myself for whatever waves of intensity might come my way. Her overt enthusiasm in her pursuit of my attention and affection often made me want to retreat further into my shell. I found myself attempting to maintain an ignited defense at all times, wary of letting any vulnerability show that might give her an opening into my personal sphere. What perhaps frustrated me most was Fran's jealousy of my closeness with my mother-in-law, an indisputable bond that had developed organically over years. My mother-in-law entered my life early on and left a lasting impression with her natural kindness and understanding. The friendship took root without pressure or force, evolving steadily as I became part of her family through marriage. Unlike Fran, my mother-in-law intuitively respected my space and the rhythms of my life, offering support and advice only when invited. Fran, observing this, couldn't comprehend why she wasn't welcomed with the same warmth or openness. I recognized her yearning to fit into a similar role, but there was a stark difference in how each relationship had formed. My mother-in-law never imposed, never rushed, and that was what set the foundation for our closeness. She facilitated an environment where I felt free to be my true self, unguarded and unpressured, and that made all the difference. Years passed with Fran seemingly oblivious to the fundamental differences between these two relationships in my life. The gentle, effortless link I shared with my mother-in-law stood in contrast to the challenging tightrope I walked to keep things civil with Fran. There were numerous instances, like during my wedding preparations, where Fran's insistence weighed heavily on the process, leaving me grateful for my mother-in-law's tactful intervention. My husband and I even expressed our gratitude with a small gift. Fran's continual oblivion to boundaries often made even the simplest family gatherings feel like emotional minefields. She saw herself as filling a void left by my biological mom's absence, oblivious to the fact that her approach was precisely what pushed me further away. Handling Fran required maintaining a delicate balance. On one hand, my desire to preserve my dad's contentment, and on the other, my need to protect my own peace of mind. Even after so many years, I held hope that perhaps, eventually, she might begin to understand the nuances of these interpersonal dynamics. But until then, extracting meaning from our interactions often felt like deciphering a foreign language, one filled with intention but lost in translation, leaving us standing on distant shores, separated by the gulf of unmet expectations and unheeded boundaries. As life went on, a particularly tense situation emerged, surrounding the arrival of our first child. My husband, a wonderful partner in life, harbored a particular sensitivity when it came to blood, something I knew could pose a challenge during my labor. Aware of this, we both decided to approach it practically, considering options for a backup birthing partner to support me just in case my husband found himself affected. For us, the decision was straightforward. We needed someone empathetic and reassuring who could step in naturally. I turned to my mother-in-law, whose calm and comforting presence seemed like the ideal fit. Her nurturing spirit and the deep trust I felt around her had already stood the test of time. When I broached the topic, she responded with a gracious yes, leaving me feeling comforted and secure about the plan. However, this decision sparked an unintended controversy. Fran was deeply affronted by my choice, feeling she should have been the logical option to stand in as my birthing partner, highlighting her self-imposed status as a mother figure in my life. She and my dad had already planned an extended stay nearby, presumably with the expectation of helping with the new baby, but for Fran, the fact that I hadn't turned to her for my immediate support during labor was a glaring issue. My father, likely under the impression that appeasing Fran was in everyone's best interest, brought up her grievances in a conversation. Despite this, I held my ground. I decided it was crucial to remain steadfast in my refusal to engage with her manipulation and emotional appeals. My choice of birthing partner was too personal and too significant to be influenced by Fran's inability to respect my boundaries. In my mind, the necessity of having someone who could seamlessly offer the right kind of support in such an intimate and life-altering moment was paramount. The experience should be centered around comfort, trust, and consideration, a delineation Fran's previous actions had misguided her from. As much as Fran, and perhaps my dad by association, anticipated an apology from me or a reversal of my decision, I felt it was important to remain silent on the matter. The impending visit from them loomed in the future, and I suspected Fran would attempt to bring up the issue in person. Armed with my established boundaries and clarity about what truly mattered in these critical moments, I prepared myself to stand resolute. Even if there might be yet another confrontation, learning to guard my peace must remain a priority, especially on the cusp of welcoming a new life into the world. I saw no need for apologies, only the need for them to finally understand and accept my autonomy. Though Fran continued to express her dissatisfaction, I chose not to engage further. I remained steadfast in my decision to ignore her attempts to raise the issue, trusting fully in the choice my husband and I had made about our birthing plan. To me, this was not about Fran, nor about any perceived slight against her. It was about ensuring that I felt completely supported and safe during a momentous occasion in my life. My comfort and well-being during labor, as well as the support I required, were simply not up for negotiation. Recognizing Fran's attempts to involve my dad in the situation, ostensibly to sway my decision, I maintained a polite yet firm stance. I believed that by not entertaining her dramatics, I was upholding the principles that were critical to my personal peace. It wasn't that I sought to ignore or disregard her presence or feelings, but I understood the importance of setting clear boundaries for my own emotional health. As the days drew closer to the arrival of our baby, I focused on building a positive and welcoming environment, one where the people surrounding me understood and respected my choices. It became even more apparent that my efforts to protect my space and the support system around me were crucial. In doing so, I hoped that Fran and even my dad could eventually see the necessity behind my decisions and, eventually, appreciate them for the independence and self-assuredness they reflected. Ultimately, the birth of my child should be a celebration, governed by love and understanding, free from unnecessary friction.